Versailles Palace, southwest of Paris, once the home of the King and Queen of France. Every day, it's invaded by tourists who come here to gawp at the luxury Louis and Marie Antoinette enjoyed. But back in October 1789, this place suffered an invasion of quite another kind. 7,000 women marched here from Paris through the driving rain, armed with clubs, with pitchforks. And they hadn't come to gawp.
For 3 months, the French Revolution had promised equality. But here at Versailles, it was business as usual. The king spent his days hunting, the queen threw lavish parties. Meanwhile, in the streets of Paris, people were starving.
So the mob stormed Versailles, demanding bread. They swept past the guards and invaded the palace. But at that point, they stopped. They began to argue. They had the king in their hands, but what to do with him? That was the question.
It was a question that would plague the revolution for the next 3 years.
Imagine you're Louis XVI on July the 14th, 1789. The people of Paris are dismantling the Bastille brick by brick, destroying the most visible symbol of your power. How would you feel? Well, fact is, he took it pretty calmly. Within a few weeks, he'd visited the new National Assembly, he'd said he was willing to give up his former power, he'd declared himself a friend of the revolution. This engraving shows him wearing a revolutionary cap and toasting the new state of affairs with a bottle of wine.
So what was his game?
Self-protection.
He's just playing along. He's covering his back.
Maybe. It's hard to tell. But at the time, people applauded this new Louis, this man of the people. They didn't want to get rid of the monarchy. They just wanted it stripped of its power. If Louis was happy to play along, fine. But was he? What was Louis really thinking? After the attack on Versailles, the mob brought Louis back to Paris to live in the Tuileries, under their watchful eye. And reading newspaper reports of how he spent his time, it's not hard to guess what he was really thinking.
He receives morning greetings from his wife and children. They're moments which should be heartening, but sometimes he's disturbed by the Queen's comments on their situation, and by his own dark thoughts on their future.
He doesn't sound very happy.
I bet he's planning something.
A secret letter written to one of his barons confirms he was up to something.
I approve of everything that you do to achieve my aim, which is the restoration of my legitimate authority.
At last, on the night of the 20th of June 1791, the royal family slipped past their guards through the Tuileries gardens to a waiting coach. It was the first stage of a daring dash for the border 300 kilometers away, where sympathetic troops were waiting. But when they reached the village of Saint-Menehould, just 50 kilometers from their goal, their luck ran out. These are the words of the village postmaster, Jean-Baptiste Drouet.
In the coach, I saw a woman I thought I recognized as the Queen. A man sat on the left front seat, and I was struck by his resemblance to the King, whose picture was on a banknote I carried with me.
His suspicions aroused, Drouet rode ahead to the outskirts of Varennes to alert the National Guard. As Louis and his family waited to meet friendly troops, the guards burst in and arrested them. Escorted back through the streets of Paris, the sullen crowd watched silently.
The National Assembly still couldn't decide what to do with him. But by now, public opinion had turned against the king in no uncertain terms. There were calls for a republic. Books attacking the whole idea of monarchy were widespread. This one, called Crimes of the Queens of France, blames royalty for all sorts of crimes, from murdering babies to ordering the killing of innocent people.
You might have expected Louis to keep a low profile in the circumstances, but convinced he alone knew what was best for France, he kept opposing some of the National Assembly's decrees.
Bad move. On the 10th of August, a mob of 20,000 attacked the Tuileries. And after a fierce battle, the king and his family were imprisoned. In September, a republic was declared, and the monarchy abolished. In December, the king was put on trial in front of all the elected deputies. The verdict was never really in doubt. As one prosecutor said,
Either Louis's head will fall, or we will be buried under the ruins of the Republic.
Sure enough, all 693 deputies found him guilty. None were against. The sentence was death. This is Place de la Concorde in modern-day Paris. Then, it was known as Place de la Révolution. And on the 21st of January, 1793, Louis was brought here to face the guillotine. When Louis tried to speak, the drummers were ordered to beat, drowning out his last words. They tied his hands behind his back, pushed him under the guillotine, and it was over.
The revolutionaries had finally solved the problem of what to do with the king.
but if they thought the revolution was over, they were mistaken.
It was about to enter a new and bloodier phase.